Hi, I'm Kevin Holm-Hudson, Associate Professor of Music Theory at the University of Kentucky and author of the textbook Music Theory Remixed, A Balanced Approach for the Practicing Musician, published by Oxford University Press. In this video, we'll be considering intervals. An interval can be thought of as the distance between two pitches. And some intervals are small. There's less of a distance between them. Some intervals are larger. There's also different qualities or different kinds of intervals that we will look at today. And we will also get into how those intervals are written and how you can think of those intervals in spatial terms, in terms of measuring the space between particular pitches. I'm going to start with middle C. And we will kind of refer everything to middle C in this discussion. On the keyboard, if we go from any C, for example, to any other C, we have what's called an octave. We could have more than one octave. But for the purposes of our discussion, we'll keep things within an octave for now. And so we have two C's, which make up an octave. An octave is an example of a perfect interval. Perfect intervals may be thought of as the simplest intervals in terms of the relationship between the two pitches. We don't hear them as necessarily being major or minor. They are just perfect. So this is a perfect octave, and we will represent that as P8 to show that it is a perfect octave. Other perfect intervals include the perfect fifth. And when we name an interval according to its size, we always count both of the notes that are part of that interval. So that if we're playing a perfect fifth, we can hear as we go up the scale, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So those two tones, the highest and lowest tones, which we call boundary tones, outline the size of the interval. A perfect fifth, and then we also have the perfect fourth. And finally, if we have two voices that are on the same pitch, that is a perfect unison. Which we can just write as a U for unison. So octaves, fourths, fifths, and unisons are perfect before we alter them and do other things to them, which we will get to. But for now, we will move on to the so-called imperfect intervals. Imperfect intervals are intervals which do come in a major or minor variety. And to illustrate that, it's probably best to go to our keyboard again. We already learned in Chapter 1 about half steps and whole steps. So if we go from C to D, for example, on the keyboard, that is a whole step because we actually have a key in between those two as we go up the keyboard. Skipping over the black key, we have a whole step. But if there's no black key in between, or if there's no intervening key in between, for example, if we go from E to F, we have a half step. These are both examples of seconds. And C to D is a major second. And you notice I am writing a large M to signify major. whereas E to F is a minor second because there is no key in between E and F on the keyboard. Seconds, thirds, sixths, and sevenths are all imperfect intervals that can be major or minor. Now, we can alter the size of an interval further using accidentals like sharps or flats. And so, for example, if we have C to D, which had been a major second, and we put a flat in front of the D. So now we do get to that black key. That's also a minor second. So we had a major second, and then we have the minor second. So both of those are examples of minor seconds. Now we can alter these intervals even farther. And to do this, one way of thinking about intervals is what I call the interval funhouse. In the interval funhouse, you have a floor and you have a ceiling, a low note and a high note. And just like a funhouse, both the floor and the ceiling can be moved, can be adjusted up or down. And so you'll notice in the interval funhouse, as I raise my lower note or raise my floor, the space between the notes gets smaller. Or if I move my ceiling or my upper note down, the space gets smaller. If I move the upper note or ceiling up, the space gets larger. Likewise, if I move the lowest note or floor down, the space gets larger. So what this means is that we can take, let's say we take a third, A to C. And on the keyboard, A to C is a minor third. So now if I take that minor third and I lower my A, it becomes an A flat. That makes the interval a major third. Now what happens if I take a major interval and I make it larger still? For example, if I take my major third with my A flat and I change the C to a C sharp, this is still a third because we still have an A and a C skipping over the B in between. But now I've taken my minor third, I've made it a major third, and now it becomes larger than a major third. This is called an augmented third. So I will write out augmented here. The abbreviation for augmented is a plus sign. So that would be an augmented third. So here is minor third, major third, augmented third. Now, to the ear, this starts to sound like a fourth, like a perfect fourth. An augmented third is enharmonically the same as a perfect fourth, which is to say that it sounds the same as a perfect fourth, but it's spelled differently. And in a piece of music, it would actually function differently than a perfect fourth would. We'll be getting to that in another chapter. But finally, if we go back to our minor third example, what if we took our C and made it a C flat? So now we've taken our minor third and we've made it even smaller than minor. That is what's called a diminished third, diminished interval. And that is abbreviated with a small degree sign to indicate that the interval is diminished. Now with perfect intervals, remember there's no major or minor with a perfect interval. There's no such thing as a major fifth, for example. It will be perfect to start with. If we make a perfect interval smaller, we go directly to diminished. So we had a perfect fifth, making the ceiling smaller or the floor higher gives us a diminished fifth. On the other hand, if we take our perfect fifth and we make it larger by raising the ceiling or lowering the floor, then we get an augmented fifth. And so when we're looking at intervals, we have our perfect intervals. And on one side, we've got diminished, and on the other side, we have augmented. With imperfect intervals, they are either major or minor. And you can make a minor interval major or a major interval minor. You can increase the size of a major interval to make it augmented and decrease the size of a minor interval to make it diminished. And as these examples with the thirds show, we're not actually changing where the note heads are located on the staff. We're not changing the letter names that are involved. These are all still thirds, but the quality of the third is changed by altering one or both of those notes chromatically with sharps or flats, so that you can have a minor third, a major third, an augmented third. If we go one step further, a doubly augmented third, which means we would write that augmented symbol twice. Or we could take a major third, a minor third, a diminished third, a doubly diminished third. 2 degree symbols to indicate that it is doubly diminished. We'll be exploring the implications of intervals in further chapters, but for now we could just point out that the spelling of an interval says a lot about how a particular tone is going to move in a melody or how a particular chord is going to resolve in a harmony. I'm Kevin Holm-Hudson, and this is Music Theory Remixed. You'll find much more about intervals and how to spell them in Chapter 2 of Music Theory Remixed.